All right. Thank you guys for showing up right on time. I'm going to give a few more minutes for other people to come in. All right. Thank you all for coming in so promptly. I'm going to wait just another minute to make sure that we get most people here. I have one thing that I'm going to cover for class specifically, which is an assignment, but it's not a difficult one, I don't think. And I will give you some time. And also, there's a significance about today politically, which I'm going to cover. And I also want to talk about all the misinformation that's out there, because it just got to me this weekend. I kind of flipped out. And so I spent literally till 11 o'clock last night putting together a presentation dealing with media and misinformation. Yes, Caton, your question about live on YouTube, and you can turn that tab off because it's all going to get posted eventually. But yes, formerly I had been recording to Zoom's memory banks and then using those links. But Zoom has informed the district that we're filling up all of its memory, and YouTube is limitless in memory. And so we were told a couple weeks ago to please live stream onto YouTube, and then of course that's a recording which then you can look at later. And YouTube is actually better because you can close caption it, and you can close caption it in different languages, and it actually is better. But there's a feedback about a 3 or 4 or 5 second delay on the YouTube live. So if you have that up on your phone, whatever, then you get to hear me twice, which can lead to a reverb. Anyway. And actually strangers can't watch the class because it's unlisted. So you have to have a BSD account to even get in. And the only people that get to see it are you guys. And only you guys get into my Canvas page because you're the only ones that have invites. So yeah. So it's all safe. So a couple of things I want to show you that are of significance today. This right here, I'm not going to tap to unmute, but this is Georgia meeting to officially count their electoral college votes, and that is happening today. All of the states are counting their electoral college votes. Of course, it's a pro forma thing. We already know who won the states. We already know how this is going to go, but this is the process. So today, all of the states' votes will be counted. And you can see right here, Wisconsin Supreme Court rejects last-ditch Trump effort to invalidate 200,000 votes from Milwaukee and Madison. So all the states are going to take care of it. Next, January 6th, which is less than a month from today, the votes get counted in Congress. And in fact, the process goes that the House and the Senate both meet all together, and they count the votes together. And if anybody in either as a senator or a representative has any complaints, any issues, they can challenge a state's electoral college votes. And if a person from each house, in other words, a representative and a senator, if one of each agree that they have issues with a certain state's votes, then both houses go to their own separate rooms, go to the Senate chambers and the House chambers, and they have up to 2 hours to vote, to discuss it. And it could be actually overturned if both the House and the Senate disagree with that vote. Being that the House is majority Democrat, that will never happen. So then the very last thing that will happen on January 6th is the Vice President, Mike Pence, is going to have to declare that his boss, Donald Trump, has lost the election and Joe Biden has won it. So that is going to fall to Mike Pence's office to do that job. So that's going to happen next January. But today, all of this is going to be counted, and it's semi-official after today. It'll be official on January 6th. The other thing that is noteworthy that just was reported is that Cleveland's baseball team, this is a little bit of social benefit here, or progress. Cleveland's baseball team will drop its Indians team name, so they're no longer going to be known as the Cleveland Indians. And they were the most egregious. Their logo was horrible. But this follows on the footsteps of the Washington Redskins dropping the Redskins name, and they haven't even chosen a new name yet. They're just the Washington football team right now, while they think of something else. But so that's social progress. So I thought I'd let you guys know that. But I was reading the news this weekend and reading where basically a third of the nation thinks that there was widespread fraud done in this past election, even though the National Cybersecurity Officer declared that this was the cleanest election in over a century. And every Secretary of State has within their state said the elections were fair. Nevertheless, a third of people think they weren't fair. And so that got to me, how people could believe when all the evidence is to the contrary. And that took me down the road of media sources and who you listen to in the media. And so this is something I feel is sort of incumbent on me as a teacher of government to give you guys some clear information, because I know that even people I've known say, I don't know what to think anymore. I don't know who to believe. And if that's the case, then the chaos agents win. If you don't know who to trust and who to believe, then the chaos agents win. So let me give you my little spiel on this in the form of a PowerPoint. So I'm going to keep it rational. And it has to do with what used to be known as the fairness doctrine, which isn't the doctrine anymore, but at one time it was, and how we got to the media landscape we're in. So, and this is not trying to play Republican or Democrat, because the Secretary of State from Georgia is a Republican, and he's pig biting mad about the stuff that's been said about his state right now. So this is nothing to do about parties. It has to do with about pushing conspiracy theories that have already been debunked. So, about the fairness doctrine and how we got to where we are today. Pardon me. So, the fairness doctrine, media polarization, or do we even speak the same language now? So, in the emergence of broadcasting technology back in the 20s, broadcasting was done by geeks, people who were radio enthusiasts, and they set up their own stations on frequencies they set themselves. There was no regulation or guidance to this. They just did it, and they say, hello out there in the world. Can anybody hear me? And it led to what became known as electromagnetic cacophony, just noise, people broadcasting. The deal is when you have a low power station, nobody else can broadcast on the same frequency you are. You sort of tie that frequency up. Radio became very, very powerful very early as people would tune in. It's the first mass communication that's not a newspaper, where you could hear a voice in real time that wasn't, Morse code kind of communication. And these four characters all used it to great effect. This is Father Coughlin, who in the 40s, he was a Catholic priest, but he was a wicked racist. And he used to rail against minorities and communists and other people. This is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who used to broadcast to the nation when he was president. They called them fireside chats. And people didn't have television. People would gather around the radio and listen to the president. This is Huey Long, who was a very popular populist Democrat governor of Louisiana, had his own little political machine going down there. And you know who this guy is. And he broadcast around the world as well. Beginning regulation of the airwaves. So Congress created the FCC, which is the Federal Communication Commission. And its predecessor, the Federal Radio Commission, 1927, in response to the confusion on the airwaves, the broadcast waves. A radio broadcast occupies a certain wavelength of the electromagnetic spectrum. No one else can use that wavelength when you're broadcasting on it. So the FCC had to basically say, look, we have to put some order to this. So airwaves are public space. They are very much like sidewalks or roads, right? But as with roads, you have to have certain kind of rules for it to run effectively and safely. So broadcasters, therefore, had to abide by certain rules to obtain and keep a broadcasting license. So in the decades after World War II, the broadcasters sort of boiled down into three big networks. And these guys were radio networks before they were television networks. And when I was growing up, NBC, CBS, and ABC were it on television. That's all you could get. And then there was educational television, but it was a minor player and not that interesting. But they set, together with a few metropolitan newspapers like the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune, they set the tone for national conversation. On half-hour evening news shows, the anchors tried to inform the country as a whole and tried to offer as little partisan commentary as possible. In other words, they tried to be neutral. Sunday morning programs like Meet the Press featured interviews with politicians. Occasionally, they would do a documentary special, would give a deep dive into a particular topic. But virtually all these programs, journalists tried to steer clear of a partisan perspective. They just tried to show the evidence. So they're not trying to play to the right or to the left. And the origin of the fairness doctrine, which has been something that people have been discussing more recently, much of the approach to television news was shaped by the fairness doctrine. A policy of the FCC beginning in 1949, the doctrine was based on the notion television networks were public trustees. Licensed by the federal government, they ought to serve the entire nation, the argument went, by airing competing perspectives on controversial issues. While the policy was intended to foster a full and fair debate, in practice it led to networks avoiding employing anchors or reporters with obvious biases, and they just tried to play it down the middle. And what the fairness doctrine also said was that if you have an editorial comment by of a certain political nature, then you have to offer equal time to the other side. So on your station, you could not go too far to the left or too far to the right. You had to offer both opinions if you're going to offer either one. So some local radio hosts flouted the rule by taking aggressively conservative stances on the air. only to find the courts forcing the stations to provide equal time on the other side. When one conservative radio host in Pennsylvania tried to discredit journalist Fred Cook by describing him as a potential communist, among other things, Crook asked for equal airtime. The Red Lion Broadcast Company that owned this station denied the request, but Crook took his case all the way to the Supreme Court and prevailed. He won. In the landmark Red Lion Broadcasting versus FCC in 1969, the Supreme Court ruled that the fairness doctrine was constitutional. Free speech, the justices held, was the right of the viewers and the listeners, not the right of the broadcasters. Let me repeat that. Free speech was the right of the viewers and the listeners, not the right of the broadcasters. Therefore, the networks had to provide ample play for free and fair competition of opposing views. That's back then. In the 1980s, this all changed. President Ronald Reagan believed the marketplace, not the government, was the best arbiter for competing viewpoints. Notably, Reagan's appointee for the FCC commissioner, Mark Fowler, that's this guy right here, had long opposed the rules. We've got to look beyond the conventional wisdom that we must somehow regulate this box, Fowler wrote on the Red Line ruling. There's nothing special about television's content and no need for the government to be concerned. And to be fair, there's a lot more broadcast options now than there were then. So in 1987, the FCC announced it would no longer enforce the fairness doctrine. The commission deemed the expansion of cable television technology made old arguments about the scarcity of airtime irrelevant, and the doctrine inhibited broadcasters from tackling controversial issues. And there's some truth to that. There's a lot more space. And now, of course, we have the internet, which is, there's no scarcity of outlets. So almost overnight, the media landscape is transformed. And the driving force is talk radio. In 1960, there were only 2 all-talk radio stations in America. In 1995, there were 1,130. While television news on the old networks and CNN still adhered to the standard of objectivity, radio comes out as a totally different animal. It's wide open. And one of the guys that started this was a guy named Howard Stern. You may have heard of him. They called him a shock jock because the stuff he would do on the radio would be shocking culturally. But that led into Rush Limbaugh, which led into Tucker Carlson. Shortly after this, New York conservative talk radio icon Bob Grant had long been known for testing the limits of the doctrine, but now he's free to engage in outspoken nativism and racism. Discussing the LA Riot 91, he called African Americans screaming savages and complained that heaven forbid you talk about white rights. And immigrants were his favorite target as well. The country, he said, was being flooded with millions of subhumanoids. And then comes Rush Limbaugh, emerged as a national conservative celebrity with regular attacks on commie libs, feminazis, and environmentalist wackos. Limbaugh quickly cultivated a loyal audience of self-styled ditto heads. And others in the industry took the cues from him. I'm not sure where the business is going, Bill O'Reilly told a friend in '93, but my gut says it's going in the direction of Rush. And man, I'm going to be there. And Bill O'Reilly certainly was. The public readily responded to the new model Limbaugh advanced after the demise of the fairness doctrine. In '94, he had an audience of 20 million Americans tuning in on some 650 stations. What Rush realizes, and what a lot of listeners don't, as an Atlanta station manager explained, is that talk radio programming is entertainment. It is not journalism. So, to underscore this point, in the years since, talk radio has bloomed into cable network news and internet outlets. Taking their cues from talk radio, they played towards the scandals and salacious to draw their audience, because this is a profit-making business. You need to draw people. The entertainment versus truth of broadcasts is still the same. Consider Fox News host Tucker Carlson. Defending Carlson, that should be an L in there, from accusations of slander, Fox lawyers defended his actions, claiming, and this is Fox lawyers, you can't expect to literally believe the words that come out of Carlson's mouth. And that assertion is not coming from Carlson's critics. It's being made by a federal judge in the Southern District of New York and by Fox News's own lawyers in defending Carlson against accusation of slander. And it worked, by the way. U.S. District Judge Mary Kay Weissakel's opinion, leaning heavily on the arguments of Fox's lawyers. The general tenor of the show should then inform viewers that Carlson is not stating actual facts about the topics he discusses, and is instead engaging in exaggeration and non-literal commentary. She wrote, Fox persuasively argues that given Mr. Carlson's reputation, any reasonable viewer arrives with an appropriate amount of skepticism about the statement he makes. And the judge, there's a picture of her, the judge, an appointee of President Trump, added whether the court frames Mr. Carlson's statements as exaggeration, non-literal commentary, or simply bloviating for his audience, the conclusion remains the same. The statements are not actionable. In other words, it's entertainment, it's not the truth. Carlson has been accused of hyperbolic, vicious, and unfounded claims about women, people of color, and immigrants in the past. In spite of it, or because of it, this year his audiences have made his show the top-rated program in the history of cable news. He maintains the backing of Fox executive chairman and CEO Lachlan Murdoch. So, in this picture right here, here's all these big media players, and down here's talk radio. And then talk radio says, good news, Congress thinks we're running America. So Congress is still talking about this one. It's gone way, 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 way past talk radio now. So who in the media can you believe? 5 tips to help you spot misinformation. And you've probably gotten this in other classes. But 1, exercise skepticism. Take any new information, whether it's the news or on social media, especially on social media, or from a buddy at a happy hour, with a bit of doubt. Expect the source to prove their work and show how they came to the conclusion, and try to compare information from a number of different outlets. Because if it's real news, it's in multiple outlets. It's not even hard to find. Number 2, understand the misinformation landscape. Misinformation isn't new, but the social media platforms for engaging with it are constantly changing and increasing their influence. These, whoops, go back, wasn't done. These platforms have no financial obligation to tell the truth. Their business models depend on user engagement. So the more inflammatory it is, the more users they get. So reducing your dependence on social media will be good for your news judgment. 3, pay extra attention when reading about emotionally charged and divisive topics, because that's the red meat. Misinformation is most effective on hot button issues and immediate news. Ask yourself, is this complicated or something that's hitting an emotional trigger? They love to outrage. And this happens, by the way, on both ends of the spectrum, the right and the left. They love outrage, right? Get you all fired up, because that gets you brings you back and makes them more money. So on these cases, you need to be ultra skeptical. And was it reported as fact, or was it actually just opinion or entertainment? In fact, Tucker Carlson, on what the issue he got sued, he said, these are the uncontrovertible, undisputed facts. And it turns out they weren't undisputed facts. They weren't even facts. He was just making up stuff out of whole cloth. Investigate what you're reading or seeing. What does skepticism look like in practice? It means asking questions. Is content paid for by a company or a politician or a potentially biased source? Is there evidence? One of the reasons that all of Trump's cases have failed, and by the way, I'm going to put this in the chat, the score right now of Trump's, that I'm aware of Trump's legal challenges, he is 0 for 57. Imagine a soccer team or a baseball team or anything going 0 for 57. What was that? Is that a comment there?
Just 57?
57 legal cases and 0 judged in his favor.
It's only been like a month.
They flooded the courts with these, especially in the swing states. There's like 10 and 12 court cases going on simultaneously. And some of the judgments that have dismissed these cases have even come through judges that Trump himself appointed, basically saying, get this crap out of here. You are not presenting evidence, you are presenting hearsay. And until you come up with evidence, there's nothing to judge. And they have not brought forth evidence. And this is why I'm doing this, because you keep saying something, it does not make it true. So, and yelling probably won't solve misinformation. So don't assume bad intentions or stupidity, just meet the other person where they are and be curious if a person is backing up an unfounded claim. Don't go after them, but just ask some questions, ask some basic questions and find out where can you find common ground and go from there. This is a chart of media outlets. And in fact, this right here, this website, and I'm going to post this. I haven't posted it yet, but I'm going to post this in Canvas. That will take you to an interactive chart where all these sources are listed. But basically, within this green boundary here, these are reliable sources. So AP, Reuters, there's NPR, the Weather Channel's up here, the Denver Post, Public Broadcasting, Politico. Over on this side, it tends to skew liberal. There's the New York Times, there's the Guardian, the Washington Post. Over on this side, it tends to skew conservative. There's the Wall Street Journal, there's Today, there's the Financial Times, Bloomberg. But inside of here, these guys fact checked. These guys will not publish rumors. They will have it fact checked, and they will know that it is true before they broadcast it. When you start getting down into here, it starts getting a little hazier. So as it says, complex analysis or mix of fact and reporting and analysis, but is it down here, analysis or high variation of reliability. So these get to be okay. And look, CNN is down here, as in, CNN is on 24 hours a day. They sensationalize, they absolutely do. And then you start getting down into here, and Fox News is even, look at this, there's Fox News on the web, there's Fox News television down here, as in selective or incomplete story, unfair persuasion. In other words, and these are on the left, Crooks and Liars, The Daily Cause, Occupy Democrats, Bipartisan Report, Palm Report. These are left-leaning sources that you don't believe. And these are right-leaning sources that you also don't believe. And then you go down into here like InfoWars, which is total garbage. So what this stuff is like down in here, it's like you're a fiction writer. You're a fiction writer, and you are making up a political thriller, but you're using real people as your characters. You're using real political people as your characters, and you're assigning motives and you're assigning actions that don't really exist, but you cherry pick just enough real information to stuff it in and make it sound plausible. And then you market it as the truth, and it's not, it's fiction. But that is where you get about half of the Republicans believe Donald Trump rightfully won in 2020, but that it was stolen from him. It has not been stolen. The press is all over this. If it had been stolen, the press would have loved. They make money by selling stories. They would have made a fortune selling a story about how it was stolen in Massachusetts or Pennsylvania or Michigan or Georgia or Arizona. They would have been all over it. They haven't found any. The only thing that's been found is a constant stream of conspiracy theories. Oop, I think we've got a dog fight happening outside my house. Some little dog is screaming. Sorry about that. A new Reuters Ipsos opinion poll found that 52% of Republicans believe Trump won the election. And 68% were concerned about rigged voting count processes that favored Biden. The Attorney General of Georgia has been covered in this stuff, and he's a Republican, and he voted for Trump. And he's like, it didn't happen. So here we go. Court challenges by President Trump as lawyers supporting challenging President-elect Biden's election victory, 57. Court decisions in his favor, 0. Conspiracy theories, beyond count. Evidence of widespread fraud brought to light in court, none. And just this Friday, the Supreme Court recently decided on Friday, December 11th, in the case of Texas plaintiff versus Pennsylvania et al., because Texas sued Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Georgia, trying to disband their votes. And the Supreme Court said the state of Texas motion for leave to file a bill of complaint is denied for lack of standing. So in other words, Texas, you run your elections. Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, they run their elections. Texas has no say in how Wisconsin runs its election any more than Wisconsin tells Texas how to do it. So there's no standing in court. Texas has not demonstrated a judicially cognizable, in other words, understood interest in the manner in which another state conducts its elections. All other pending motions are dismissed as moot, which means as having zero value. This is all the Supreme Court said in dismissing this case. Basically, in other words, no. And the Supreme Court has on it 3 Trump nominees. So, and it was a 9-0 decision. None of the justices thought they would take this case. So I have to share that with you because the state of confusion is just out of control and it's nonsense. So if you love conspiracy theories because they're just fun, cool, but it's not the truth. And it's really, there's the fairness doctrine is never coming back. There's just too many outlets to even try to regulate it. So it's up to you guys to understand what's truth and what is nonsense, and to decide wisely between the two of them. And you can always find out. So there never has to be the place where you don't know who to trust. There are places to trust, and you just have to rely that there is reliable information out there, and look for that. Okay, because people are going to be going squirrel, squirrel, squirrel. And actually, there's one comment here that I also want to show you. Hold on one second. And that is this coming right up. This is, I think, the strategy that's been used. which is, if you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. Joseph Goebbels was the Nazi maestro of propaganda. And that was their strategy. If you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. Jews are dangerous. Jews are dangerous. Jews are dangerous. Jews sold us out. Jews are the reason we lost World War I. Jews are the reason we're in terrible shape now. If you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. So, and that's the strategy that's being employed. So don't fall for it. Don't be suckers. Okay? So I'm not going to test you on that right now, but I just took a half hour to disabuse you of falsehoods. Now to get back to civil disobedience. You see, this is all related. Yes, it was a desperate attempt to avoid election. It was embarrassing to their party. Yes. So on to Google Chrome, except not having to do with Cleveland's baseball team, but having to do, so this is the modules, and go down to civil disobedience, pro and con. So up here is the Thoreau statement that we read last time. Civil disobedience, pro and con. And there are 5 points being made here about pro and con civil disobedience. And I want you to respond to these. So point number 1, it makes governments more accountable. We elect a government for an average of 4 or 5 years. During these years, there's very little law-abiding citizens can do to affect change or make their voices heard. Protest and civil disobedience against laws not voted for by the general public can provide an outlet for public opinion and a very directive, crude method of representing and powering the oppressed and disenfranchised in a society. Pressure is exactly the needed ingredient when injustice is boiling over. Even with the voting system in place, injustice sneaks its ugly head in, not because of the civilly disobedient minority, that the government it's that the government itself is sometimes unjust. It is in fact the majority of the superior courteous citizens whom have committed the injustice that has caused citizens to rise up in civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is like the insurance for justice. Civil disobedience ensures the laws we vote for and the laws that should be in place are at least considered, if not passed. Or, on the con side, the fact politicians want to hold on to power makes them accountable throughout their term in office. They wouldn't do anything which would alienate people dramatically for fear of losing votes. And there are many more ways to show that votes will be lost than breaking the law. There are also local elections between general elections where parties can be rewarded or punished for their actions in government, acting as a very good barometer of public opinion without the need for civil disobedience. And civil disobedience puts pressure on the state to privilege the interests of the civilly disobedient minority over the majority. Compare this with voting, in which anyone who chooses to exercise their vote has equal say. This is why it makes sense to say that voting makes government accountable to the people, whereas civil disobedience in a democratic society is often anti-democratic. Okay, now these are just arguments, which you are supposed to agree and disagree with. Point 2, sometimes it's the only tool in the box. Civil disobedience was practiced to great effect by people such as Gandhi and Martin Luther King. It's difficult to imagine the change they effected coming about any other way, or certainly as quickly. Their civil disobedience corrected a huge injustice at a time when no politicians took them seriously. In fact, Martin Luther King said that not only was it okay to break unjust laws, but we have a moral responsibility to do so. As St. Augustine said, an unjust law is no law at all. Versus, there is a difference between breaking the law and making a point and mass protests of an entirely legal kind. If Gandhi and Martin Luther King had been able to rally enough people, they would have created enough publicity for their cause and they wouldn't have had to break the law. In a democratic society, civil disobedience is never the only tool in the box. There are always the power tools. In a democracy, the power tools are simply the legal channels. While the actions of Martin Luther King Jr. should certainly be applauded, we must look at two instances from which legal channels were far more beneficial. First, MLK orchestrated a great showing in his march from Selma to Montgomery. The spotlight shined brightly on his march. Often revered as a great act of civil disobedience, the fact is MLK acted completely within the law. The legal channels cleared the way for him to march, and the issue rose to national prominence. Nowhere did civil disobedience occur, so we see that it is never the only tool left in the box. Editorializing on my part here, the Selma to Montgomery march did happen legally, but only after the very first attempt was literally beaten into submission by the police. And people were seriously hurt in that. So the second attempt was legal. The first attempt was protest, and it was rather savagely sent back. So, furthermore, arguably the most significant Supreme Court case in the civil rights era occurred exclusively through legal channels. Brown versus Board of Education occurred in 1954 without any civil disobedience. The issue of segregated schools rose to prominence and was properly addressed. Quite simply, civil disobedience is never the only tool in the box in a democracy. There are always various avenues to obtain change. More often than not, these avenues are far more appropriate and capture the need for change much more than an often senseless act of breaking the law. Point 3, these get shorter. Sometimes it's the only way to publicize an issue. Marches are a waste of time. Witness the hundreds of thousands who marched fruitlessly against the war in Iraq. And that's true. But people will notice somebody getting arrested, especially a celebrity. We might not like the fact this is true, but we can't deny it is so. Causes need the oxygen of publicity, and one of the best ways to get that is to get someone famous arrested. Or civil disobedience can quickly turn into outright confrontation and even violence. Both Gandhi and MLK struggled to contain their followers, and there aren't very many leaders like them around. Saying people should get arrested is tantamount to giving them free rein to do whatever they want to do to get publicity. And let's not forget the term oxygen of publicity was first applied to the Irish Republican Army, hardly models for civil disobedience movement. Point 4. The law has been created by the controlling elites to serve their purposes. When one has a different purpose, bringing one into conflict with the law, why would one not break it? What possible virtue is there in obedience for the sake of it? Versus, laws are usually created for the general public. Besides, should we risk deaths just because a few people shake their heads? That's very dismissive. And last point, laws are a human construct. Someone proposed them and implemented them for a reason, and sometimes these reasons are completely unjustified. Therefore, disobedience can be justified. Versus, understand laws before you disobey them. Understand what they hold up. Sometimes laws may not look like a great idea, but mostly they actually hold up something important to the community. So these are 5 arguments. There's a pro and a con. Which side do you agree with, or do you agree or disagree in parts with both sides. Ha ha! So it's not necessarily an either or. Think of these arguments not as black and white, binary, right, wrong, but on a sliding scale in which neither side is 100% correct and a certain degree of truth can be shared by both sides. But please justify your point of view. Does it make governments more accountable? Is it the only tool in the box? Is it the only way to publicize an issue? Sometimes the law is wrong, and sometimes you need to understand laws before you obey them or disobey them. And you may certainly use as evidence your experience of the protests of the past year. And Lazarus, if you could yawn any bigger, your jaw would come loose. No, didn't mean that. So the past year has been full of protests. Some of them peaceful, some of them not. So how do you feel about these? Use what you understand about the protests for the past year as part of your reasoning in that. So civil disobedience is about peacefully breaking the law in order to publicize the fact that it's a bad law. So what do you think about the way protests have gone? Use that as evidence to support how you feel about those 5 different points, right? And see what you say, because this is your political future. There's going to be lots of protests, I'm sure, in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. There'll be plenty of it. And your own feeling about where you should stand on this is something you should think deeply about. How do you participate? And you're right, Lazarus, the Proud Boys seem to get a little bit of a gift. Although there was in Olympia several days ago, there were protests, or maybe it was on Saturday. There was a right-wing protest, and I don't know if it was Antifa or just counter protesters showed up as well and got into their faces, and somebody got shot. And my feeling is like, let them protest, let them have their say. You don't need to get in people's faces. That kind of protest and counter protest is just seeds for a fight and seeds for somebody to get hurt. And that to me is not necessary. Let them have their say. Take the time, have your say, and make sure that your point is clear. But just getting into a street fight is muddies everything.
Yesterday, I saw that they were protesting in front of the church, and I think they might have gone into the church or started vandalizing it. I don't know what, but the police were just allowing it. It's like, yeah. If someone exists during the Black Lives Matter protests, the police are all over them, tear gas, all this horrible stuff. And then, they're ruining a church or doing stuff. And it's like, nope, it's fine. What's happening? Huh? They completely don't care. And there's this video a little while ago of on sides of street. On the sidewalk is Proud Boys walking to downtown Portland. Mm-hmm. And then on the other side is just the police chilling, walking alongside them. It's like, these are the people who are rioting, who are causing harm, who are actively inflicting violence. And yet you are just like, huh? Who are they? People are here? What? It's like the people who are peacefully protesting and trying to speak out on what's happening and what's wrong in the world. Mm-hmm. They get harmed. People get felonies put against them so they can't vote. And then for the people who are, inflicting violence and destroying government property, oh no, we can't say anything about that. We can't arrest them.
Yeah, I can't argue with you. There does seem to be that evidence happening. Yes. And go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to really quickly add. I feel like
go ahead.
It's hard when there are real problems in the world that we were trying and like, the Black Lives Matter movement. And I feel like there's just too much like favoritism that it's kind of hard to get our point across, especially because, when we're trying to change something that could be beneficial for more than just one race, it's something that would, like, all men created equal. It's kind of going off of that point, and we're trying to make our world better, and then the police are just shooting us down saying, oh, you're not valid enough.
Well, that goes back to the point of Thoreau when he says, why do we keep crucifying our Jesuses? Why do we, when people are actively trying to make improvements to society, why do we always make them the sacrifices? And why do we always see them as the enemy? And that's a point that Thoreau made back in 1848, and it still is largely true. Holding up a mirror in that kind of way is something that status quo never likes. So it's partly because people hate change, but it's also partly because status quo likes things the way they are. The power structure as it is likes things as they are, and they are resistant to change. And police forces everywhere in the world, in every country in the world, police forces represent the status quo. Whatever that status quo is, that's what they defend. And so, and which is to say, it's resistant to change. It sees its interest in the power structure as it is now. And so that's an unfortunate truth. I can't think of a single place where that's not true. So, and it does benefit them. Of course it does. Or at least they see change as threatening to them. And so, so for instance, slogans like defund the police, on the surface of it, it sounds like you don't want police around, which is not what the message is. It means restructure the funding for how civil disturbances get responded to and who responds to them. So maybe if a person is having a psychological break, you don't send in the police, you send in somebody that knows how to deal with a person having a psychological trauma. So it reorients your security, who responds to these things. But what most people will hear is, then there's no cops out there. And that's not what the description is. And in fact, that whole thing of what it means is still under discussion. There's no firm decision one way or another. Yes, Lazarus.
I'm gonna pull up a little comic. The main thing about how people see as defund the police. Well, I would show the comic, but the school says I can't. Basically, it's the comic is a police officer with a bunch of rocks on his back of a bunch of civil things of like dealing with the homeless, mental health problems, housing, all this other stuff. Sorry for background noise, but when people say defund the police, they mean not putting all of this funding and pressure on one sort of area.
That's exactly right. And so, and this is something that all of you are going to have to think hard about when you do get to be voting age, because we as a society have defaulted to let the police handle all of these different issues. And if we want to do it differently, that's going to take a social agreement, a broad social agreement, that part of our social contract means that we will meet these needs in more appropriate ways, in healthier, more beneficial ways for everybody. But we have to have that conversation, and we have to come to some large social agreement that this is how we want to do it. Otherwise, that status quo is not going to change. So this is something that y'all need to kind of keep your head above water on and be aware of, because police have just given this by default, because we have decided to do nothing about these other issues. So the police show up. So now you have homeless people, you have people with mental illness that don't have proper care or facilities.
I have the comic right here. It'll be hard to see.
Yeah.
And I'll send it to you later.
Okay, but I get you, and I get your point, because we have loaded them up with responsibilities for every social ill,
Yeah.
and they're not equipped to do that.
And also for the fact that a lot of the people who go into the police force, there is a high knowing of people going to the police force who want to assert their dominance over other people, or having the thing of being a a person with shiny badge and gun type thing. It's kind of white knight type thing.
Okay.
I don't know exactly, but it's just there's a lot. Defunding the police means changing the definition, changing what it means, and making sure that there isn't the negative connotations of the first police, which were people who captured slaves and brought them back to their owners.
So I won't try to, one thing to be careful of, don't, because this is something that is commonly done and it gets us into trouble. Don't necessarily try to read the minds of other people or project into their minds what you think they're thinking. That's dangerous, because you can project into anybody's mind any thought that you have and believe in it. So that may be true what you say, that I don't know, but there is, in police culture, there is a strong resistance to being held accountable for things that get done, and that has been demonstrated over and over again. Within police culture, however you come in, with whatever intention you come in with, there is in police culture a strong sort of behavioralist curve that people fall in line with that. So that you can actually show and demonstrate. So you guys, it's 10:47. You have an assignment. It's the last assignment I'm going to give you before the break. I'm going to have something for you next week, but it'll be short. It'll be seasonally appropriate. It's something I do before winter break every year. And so, oh yeah, vaccines are starting today. And hopefully, yes, people have more PPE appropriately, but we're starting to vaccinate today. That's historic. That means, to my mind, next year we will all meet each other face to face in our brand new school.
We'll meet each other face to face with masks still on.
Maybe, perhaps we'll see. But I tell you what, if they offer me a needle within a vaccine, I'm going to jump in line for that.
Teachers are high on the list, right?
I am not. We're probably in the top 10. Medical personnel's absolutely. Frontline people, absolutely. Elderly people, absolutely. They should be first in line.
Yeah, I know. I think you guys, teachers, are actually like second after medical workers, right?
I don't know. I haven't seen the list and the priorities. I wouldn't complain.
Yeah, that's just at least what I've heard from my parents. They're teachers as well. But, I don't know for certain.
I would love that. And like I say, again, part of the disinformation is like, don't trust the vaccines, and that goes with the anti-vaxxers. More conspiracy theories. I'm going to trust that science did its due diligence, and that the research was correct, and thoughtful people did their jobs well, and that this gives me, if I were to get vaccinated, it gives me resistance to the illness. And if that's the case, I'm all over it, because I live with a person who would be the last person I would want to see exposed to this illness. And I don't want to be an infection vector for anybody. So I'm jumping in that line. And if it means that we can get back into school faster, I'm all the more for it.
Yeah, my grandma's like number 3 or 4, and she just had insane lung surgery, so I wouldn't get my hopes up.
Mm-hmm. Well, your grandmother should be higher on the list. I mean, and elder people are high on the list. So get the most vulnerable vaccinated first, and then work on down. So you guys have any questions? You do have an assignment. Did you have any questions about the assignment? Okay, I'm going to ask you guys one question, and I want some honest feedback here for, because I'm thinking about this myself. I do basically, if something is to be read, I read it. Would you guys, if I said, who wants to read this, would you guys volunteer and step up? Because it might make it more interesting. Winter says in all caps. Okay, Winter. Okay, but do we have volunteers? Not my thing. Okay, thank you. Because if you guys would step up and read things for me, then that would free of you guys having to listen to my constant droning. So I would love it. So I will post break. I will turn over if there's some text to be gone over. I will share it with you, and then I will ask for volunteers. So thank you for that. And even if you don't have good inflection, that's all right. Because I mean, what's the option? Everyone listens to me constantly. And even I get tired of that. So, all right, guys. So you guys can stick around, you can ask questions, or you can take off, and I will see you once more before winter break. But have a good rest of your day, and please stay safe.
Thank you, Dr.
Have a
Lincoln.
good day and stay safe, sir.
Thank you for class.
Okay,
Have a good day.
ciao.
Hi, Mr. Kashaw.
Hey, you're the last one.
Yeah. Sorry, my thing kind of died for a second.
Okay, so do you understand what the assignment's all about?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any questions?
Nope.
Okay, so you got 15 minutes. Actually, no, you don't. You have 6 minutes before this period is over, but you can split because I'm done.
All right. Thank you.
You bet. We'll see you later.